The theme for day 3 is AI for biodiversity and ecosystems. And my name is Aditya Jain. I will be one of the TAs for this course, for this lecture, and I will be joined and supported by the other TA, Yasir, who will be helping us as well. We'll thank our partners, Google DeepMind, GitHub, CFAR, and Mila, who have supported this summer school. Yeah, so briefly about Climate Change AI, the organization is a global nonprofit that catalyzes impactful work at the intersection of climate change and machine learning. You can find more information about the organization on the website, on our X channel. There is also a community platform where you can engage with your fellow peers and also subscribe to the newsletter. So just some housekeeping checks. You can ask any general questions like about the logistics or general comments in the chat button. Or if you have any questions very specific like to the lecture which is being presented, please ask in the Q&A channel. If your question is already there in the QA channel, we will recommend that you upvote those questions instead of asking again, because given the number of participants, it may not be possible that we are able to ask all the questions, but we'll try asking the questions which have most upvotes. And also, you should be able to click show captions if you want captions during the lecture. So yeah, we have 2 lectures in today's session. The first will be AI for wildlife conservation by Professor Devis Tuia. The second lecture will be on AI for conservation decisions. It will be by Dr. Lily Zhu. So yeah, so welcome to day 3, lecture 1. We are very happy to have Professor Devis Tuia with us. So thank you so much for your time and giving us your knowledge about it. So something about Professor Devis Tuia, he completed his PhD at University of Lausanne, Switzerland, where he studied kernel methods for hyperspectral satellite data. In 2014, he joined EPFL as University of Zurich as an assistant professor and moved to Wageningen University in 2017 in Netherlands, where he was the chair of Geoinformation Science and Remote Sensing Laboratory. Since September 2020, he's back to EPFL, where he leads the Environmental Computational Science and Earth Observation Laboratory. Welcome, Professor Tuia. Thank you so much for your time and joining us. So yeah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Aditya, and thank you for having me, Eric, Millie, and all the folks at Climate Change AI. It's always a pleasure to be here. So, and most importantly, hello everybody from the attendees, whom I cannot see, unfortunately, but I'm sure you're all there with a lot of excitement. I mean, at least I hope. And so I will share my screen so we can get started. Is it like full screen, well visible? Yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah.
So yeah. So as Aditya said, I'm from Switzerland, from EPFL in Sion, and one of the hats of my lab is it's biodiversity and wildlife conservation. And today I wanted to give you a tour of roughly an hour, probably less, about the things that we can do for animal conservation and for making this more efficient and effective thanks to digital tools and AI. So before jumping into the topic, and also for me to get into the mood, I would like to launch the first poll. It's more to get to know you actually, because I mean you will get to know me in the next hour, and I probably won't unless you ask many questions, which I hope. And so I was wondering a little bit, what is your background and what do you work on? I mean, what are you interested in? Why are you following this summer school? So if you can just click on one of these for my pure curiosity, I would like to know. But first of all, how many of you are into ecology, biodiversity, and the like? Just I mean, if you are in many of those, don't worry. You can just click the main one you are part of.
Yeah, I think you should be able to see the results in real time.
Unless nobody's clicking, no.
Okay, I think I can. Maybe you can go to polls and quizzes, and you can see the. Can you go to the bottom right?
Let's pull some quizzes. There we go.
Like, can you go to the bottom and there's show captions, and then there is polls and quizzes,
Yeah.
and
Now it says, get to know each other. What aspect of CCAI you work on? I can see just the question. I can see the result.
Can you so get to know each other,
Yeah.
and can you see the results?
No.
Okay, okay, we are still taking the thing, so I
It's all
think
right.
we are
It's all right.
still getting in. Um,
No problem.
yeah, we have 165 answers from 212
Oh,
participants.
I think you can close it.
Okay, I can close it now. Okay, yeah, share results.
Oh, I saw it and it disappeared. Yeah.
Can you
All
see it now?
right. Now I can see it. Can the participants see it? Or
Probably yes.
yeah. So we have of course, climate change modeling is most of you, and then we have energy, ecology, and surprisingly, I'm just in for the AI, which is okay. It's also fine. It's all right. Well, the good thing to see is that we have a quite, uniformly distributed public. So there is something in for everyone. And if not, I'm sorry, but you still have to sit through these 45 minutes with me. All right. Okay, let's get started now. And then the poll keeps popping. So today we're going to talk about biodiversity and how we can basically do something to counter the biodiversity crisis. But the first question is like, is it really a thing? And I will say yes. I mean, there are many projections and articles that project a good share of species at risk of extinction in the next 30 years. So we're talking about 30+% of all the species that exist. So you can imagine how much this will affect us. And then now we are facing a number of potential roads. Now we can still keep going the black road we've been going with a lot of species that will be lost, or we can try to do something about it and maybe change this curve into something middle ground, or even something where we will regain all the richness we had at the beginning of the century, which it's maybe something of a dream of an idealist, but I still think that if we all work together, we can still gonna make it. And it's not just because I like species, animals, and plants and insects. It's also because the collapse of biodiversity will have tremendous consequences on all of us. So the different species that surround us, I mean, they give us a lot of services. They can be directed to your well-being or our well-being. It can be about the health. Many medicines come from plants, for example, and or the food that we eat. So we eat a lot of vegetables, for example. Or maybe some of you are meat eaters, and also different species renewed our soil, purify the water so we can drink it. I mean, there is a lot of services that come from an healthy ecosystem that we must preserve. And if you maybe are sitting in a place where it seems to you that everything is going well, don't be fooled by this. This is a global phenomenon. It's something that is affecting everywhere in the world, as you can see in the map. In the map at the top, we are talking here about habitat lost in percent, and you can see that everywhere in the world this is happening. There are places more affected than others. But it's a global phenomenon, and nobody can just say, oh, it's not my problem. It's everyone's problem. And unfortunately, it's not just a question that it's affecting everybody. It's also the degree of likelihood that this will happen. It's actually, unfortunately, very concentrated in areas of high likelihood of habitat loss. So, I mean, all in all, this is a problem that should concern us all. And I'm very happy that you're all here, and I hope also that we share this envy of doing something about it. So we're not doing so well for now. If you take back the argument of the beginning, let's say that we have been starting to assess the species that we know about. There is many species that we know nothing about. Let's say on those that we know. And among all those that we were able to observe, roughly 1/3 is in some kind of problematic situation, let's say from vulnerable to extinct. And so these are species that we should be aware of and maybe do something to help. But also, maybe more problematically, there are roughly 10% of all the species that we know that we could call data deficient. And by data deficient, I mean that we just don't have the data to say whether the species is threatened or not. And this is a lot if you think about it. And this is something that it's our mission, let's say, as a scientist in biodiversity, and also with digital tools, how we're gonna see in a second, to try to reduce this number so that we can provide to conservationists, decision makers, and the like, the tools to be able to change this curve. Because what we want is obviously what we see on the left. We want an ecosystem that is healthy and full of life and full of diversity. And we don't want something like the ecosystem on the right, that is an ecosystem that is dying. And these two pictures we took on one mission that I will talk about it a little bit later on. But these two missions were in the Red Sea, and these two places are not so far apart from each other. So this will also show you how important it is to have serious data that are based on scientific evidence, and in our case, observational data, that we can go give to decision makers so that they can make the right call. And at the end, we stay on the situation on the left and hopefully not the one on the right. Because it's not that nobody cares, all of the contrary. There is a push internationally to create this global biodiversity framework, which is let's say a set of wishes that should be then have been converted into direction for the future. And you see here a selection of those, but I think that there are a couple that are very, very powerful. For example, at least 30% of land and sea globally must be conserved as protected areas. We're far from that goal, but that's what we should aim for giving a chance for biodiversity to remain. And we also want to reduce pesticide, nutrient loss, and also I think that the GBF also gave some guidelines into significant financing for studies and actions aiming at reducing the decline of biodiversity. So this was 2021 when this framework was discussed, and in 2022 at the COP15 it was agreed by 188 countries. So I mean there is a political push to make things happen. But these are like very, very big discussions that happen at the political level. Maybe some of you are thinking, okay, but I mean, this is climate change AI. So, I mean, I want to learn about AI and how can I help as a data scientist? And of course, I mean, action happens also in the very local, and this is the people that we need to support. Here, for example, you can see on the right 2 pictures of people we work with in my lab. So some rangers in national reserves here in Kenya, for example, and also in Namibia. And these actors are those who work hard to protect the animal populations in this case. And what they do is that they record and control their population, they establish the laws, and they fight the poachers that come, for example, to kill the rhinos to take their horns. But they do a lot of this work by hand. And just imagine how hard of a work it is to manage a reserve that is extremely big, and where the animals are scarcely located, and you want to manage this, and maybe you have access to some digital tools, but often you don't. And when you have it, so when you have, I don't know, you have been putting some camera traps and you're taking pictures of your animals, then you need to go through all the pictures taken by hand, and it might take years to be on par with the data you're acquiring. And when you are in this situation, well, there is not much you can do in the now and here in order to support conservation. And this is where that data scientists like us, I'd like to welcome all of you in the same pot where I am, of data scientists for conservation. Well, this is where we can do something. So that's basically what I want to talk about today. I will be talking in 2 parts. First, we're going to talk about data and sensors. So just an overview of the different data that you can find around. And in the second part, we'll dive into machine learning approaches, and I will be showing you some of these approaches, the pros and cons, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's move to sensor data. So as for every main part of the talk, I will ask for the poll to show up. Again, it's more for understanding, which type of sensors and data you're used to work with. So a poll should appear in a few seconds, hopefully. And please, there we go. So we have here a poll. Please answer with your favorite type of sensors. It's mostly to give me an idea of, what your heart beats for, and to see.
So the polls are coming in, and
Uh-huh.
I'll share it once the results are like.
No problem, no problem. Yeah, maybe I can take a question in the meantime.
Yeah,
If there
there's a
is something.
question by Janice, like, what are the ethical implications of viewing nature primarily through the lens of ecosystem services? How might this perspective contribute to or detract from environmental conservation efforts? Do you want me to write this on your chat as well?
No, but can you just say it again?
Yeah. What are the ethical implications of viewing nature primarily through the lens of ecosystem services? Like, should we just protect them from the point of view of ecosystem services?
Okay, I see, yeah.
And how does this impact the environmental conservation efforts?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that was the angle that I took to start the talk, because the nature give us all these services, and these services we need to protect because we benefit from those. But of course, nature also has intrinsic value. So nature needs to be protected just because it exists, and we are one of the species on this planet. And of course, we are in the very comfortable role to be in a species that has a lot of means to do well and to do not well. And for the moment, we are walking into this crisis that makes that we are maybe not doing so well. So not only we should protect nature because it's important and because it has a value, because it was here before us, but also because we benefit a lot from it. So in an ethical sense, maybe I didn't want to sound totally utilitarian and say like we need to protect nature because of the ecosystem services. It's just, one of the reasons, and one of the reasons that are, to my eyes, relatively important.
Okay, thank you. And the results of the poll should be available
Thank
now.
you very much. Oh, we have a satellite people a lot. So very good. So remote sensing people like me. So great. But it's good to see that also that there is a lot of diversity. And there will be a little bit of everything in this section. So I hope that it will not be too boring. There's just one slide on satellites, so probably there is something for everybody in here. Okay, when we look at our biodiversity seen through digital sensors, we have quite a wide array of possible devices we can use. So here you can see 6 of them. These are the I'm most familiar with, and there are more for sure. And these are the sensors I wanted to talk a little bit about in the next minutes, knowing that I come from the satellite realm by my training, so hyperspectral, multispectral, and also drones, and then just recently I've been delving into camera traps and the others. Okay, let's go through a kind of a panoply of these different sensors, starting from those that are closer to the animals, and then we start getting a bit further and further away. So the first one is the sensors that are actually on animals, which are, for example, biologgers and the like. And these are sensors that allow you to really monitor a single individual. So we're talking about movement. There is a GPS, so you can have coordinates of the trajectories, the speed, and also you can record physiological variables like the heart rate, body temperature, and the like. Then thanks to this data, then you can extract some behavioral data by crossing all these different things on one animal or on a herd. Of course, you're often limited by the number of devices you can use. So you're usually limited to few individuals, and more rarely to like tagging a whole herd is something we don't do a lot. GPS can be inaccurate depending on where you are, and you need to be on land. If you go underwater, the things becomes very complicated. And also you have a number of limitations that are linked to the limited bandwidth of the device, the limited battery life, and also the fact that, for example, for colors, animals tend to grow, and you need to make sure that they don't get hurt by the color when they become adult, for example. Of course, as you can see in the picture, some of the strategy can seem very intrusive. And this is a type of device with a very long tradition in ecology. And I mean, nobody wants to hurt the animals, of course. So it's usually done in a way that is not harmful for the animals. But sometimes, unfortunately, there are some exceptions, as you can see. I don't have a lot of experience with on-animal devices, to be honest, so I will jump directly to something I know a little bit better. And so the second level, let's say, is the camera trap. So the camera trap is becoming very, very popular nowadays, because it's simply a photographic camera in a box that has more or less the same color of a tree trunk, so that it gets mimetized a little bit. And you just place it on the tree and you let it there, and it's motion triggered. So when the animal passes in the front, it starts recording. It can record images or videos, record sound as well. And there is actually a lot of drive now in the international community to create networks of camera traps that can then help us understanding species distribution, population, at the local and at the global level. If you're interested, there is this site on lila.science, which is maintained by Dan Morris, and it's a very nice repository of a lot of camera traps data, and maybe you need it for your research. It's very simple to access and to download and use the data. Now, of course, we all have in mind these beautiful shots here. You can imagine in your mind, you put a camera trap in a place, you just let it record, and you get shots like this. This can happen, but it's mostly rare. Actually, what you usually get, it's something that looks like this. So the animals are not very good at posing in front of the camera. So sometimes you have animals that are very close to the camera, or very embarrassing poses, or you have day and night differences, motion blur. Sometimes they're running. Sometimes the camera just gets triggered by grass that is moving, and then you empty half of your battery just by filming grass that is oscillating. So I mean, there is a lot of caveats that you need to discover by doing. Sometimes the animal just destroy the cameras because they don't like it. Because of course, one thing is that you should be able to make sure that the animals do not notice the camera, because otherwise you will modify their behavior, which is what you want to observe. If you don't want to use photo cameras, you might want to record their sound. And this is something that is becoming very, very popular, and there is a lot of research going on recently about passive acoustic monitoring, which is basically, I mean, to make it very simple, it's installing microphones on trees or in different places in the forest, in the water, to record sounds about the different species. It permits to study the vocal animals like birds, like whales, for example. It works by all weather, so day and night, it doesn't matter. But again, it's a new field, so it's a field that is rising. There are not so many data sets around, and when you acquire the data you acquire will be gigantic. And thanks to this data, then you will have a lot of like big data problems of filtering and try to develop the right solution to process all this sound data. Now back to images. Now let's make the sensor move and not just let it be fixed on a tree. So let's go with drones. And this is something I've been working on in the last 10 years, roughly. And here you can see a lucky student, Matthew Parkan, in 2004 in Namibia, doing our first drone expedition. And we were discovering a bit how it was working. And this is something that in terms of hardware is quite mature, and it's something that I really like the drone business, because it's kind of a safe way of imaging a national park, because it's different from hiring an helicopter or an airplane and acquiring videos from a moving airplane that sometimes gets targeted by poacher that don't want to be filmed, for example. And this is like a very safe way to make mapping and monitoring. But of course, drones are not simple to fly, mostly for permits reasons. You need to make sure you're okay with the legislation. You very often need to fly in your line of sight, at least in Switzerland. And then you need to be able to choose what is the right drone for what you want to do. Is it a quadcopter, where it's kind of a slow drone that will stay in a place stationary, or do you need something that flies very fast and very far, like a fixed wings? This is the type of thing that you need to think. And also the fact that the rotors will make noise, so you need to fly pretty high in order not to disturb the animals. But this remains an open question. It's something that there is not a complete agreement on for the time being, like at what distance we can stay without disturbing the animals, and it's definitely something worth studying if you're looking for a topic. And again, on LiDAR, Dan Morris still, he compiled a list of data sets that might be interesting to have a look at, and then you have a lot of drone data sets with different species and different levels of context. Now, to continue zooming out, the last level of zooming out is to use satellite data, and that's half of you know more or less what I'm talking about. And this, I say, like, is the ultimate scale up, so you can really cover very big areas with satellite data, but resolution sometimes is a little bit the problem. So it depends what is your financial situation. Like if you're happy with 10 meters imaging, like in Sentinel-2, this is free data. But the moment you want to go to a higher resolution, let's say 3 to half a meter, then you need to go to commercial providers such as Maxar or Planet, for example. And this images becomes very nice to use, as you can see here on the right. So when you have an image that is 30 centimeters, you start to think single animals, and this is what you need for detecting, counting, and estimating population. But the original image, don't forget, is roughly 2 meters, and you need to go through some image processing, some super resolution to make it so sharp. So what do people do when they use satellite? They mostly focus on large species, elephant, whales, this type of species, or we use indirect observation. I always give this example that in order to count penguins, we detect the droppings of the penguins to isolate the colonies, and then make some rules of counting in order to know where the colonies are and how big they are. Okay, I don't know how am I doing time-wise. Aditya, how am I doing?
You have like for the lecture we have half an hour, so you're probably good for another 20 minutes, and then we can have 10 more minutes for the Q&A.
Cool. Great.
Okay.
So maybe we can do as before. You can launch the next poll about machine learning approaches, and I can take a question while people are voting.
Sure. Maybe I can help you with the questions. Yeah. So the polls are on.
Great.
In the meantime, there's a question that what are your experiences with mobile sensors for marine wildlife, like considering their limitations? Like, what is the data most commonly gathered, which sensors are generally used, and the challenges associated with them?
Yeah, to be honest, I have very little experience with mobile sensor for marine data. There is a colleague of mine, Jerome Chapelas, here at EPFL, who is planning to use these sensors, but it's not to study the animal itself, it's more to study water quality through a sensor that it's animal carried. I've never worked underwater with sensors on animals, so I'm sorry, I cannot really answer the question.
And can the acoustic sensors like be used in cities? And will there be challenges with those considering other nodes are
Sure, sure. I mean, there are initiatives where sensors are put on buses, for example, and buses go around and they record data on air quality, for example. There is a project at MIT, if I remember well, where they are basically mapping the entirety of the city of New York by using sensors mounted on buses. Otherwise, there is a lot of citizen science initiatives in urban areas, for example, to monitor urban species. So you can use a naturalist, which is an app that you can have on your phone. And when you see a flower that you like, you can take a picture, and then the deep learning algorithm behind a naturalist will tell you which species it is, but actually you're giving one data point, which is located in space. And that will help a lot of people, including us, to make species distribution maps at the global level. So, I mean, these initiatives exist, and they're all very exciting. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
perfect.
let's see those results.
Yes. Oh, yeah, we can see the results now.
Okay, this is interesting. So we have a lot of people busy with classification and regression of images and sequences, not so many working on object detection or 3D and the like. And actually, the biggest group is, people who do not do research in AI, but I think that this is why you're taking this summer school, right? This is because you want to get some idea of how it works, what it is, and maybe later on in your research, PhDs, jobs, maybe use it for your future endeavors. So we're going to talk a lot about detection, which is good because not many of you have been working about it. And then I will try to expand in other direction, but a little bit shortly. And then we'll have a conclusion. This was the last poll. From now on, you can sit down, relax, get some popcorn, and have fun. Okay, so let's talk about machine learning. Now you know everything about data. So we have had our sensor, they have been looking at the animals. Now what we want to do is that to extract information about about all these different aspects of wildlife or also of the environment that we can be interested in. So this figure actually summarizes this idea of using a natural reserve as a kind of a playground to create a digital copy of it, where we will reconstruct the vegetation from maybe some drone data, reconstructing in 3D. Then we will start to detect the different animals, maybe to track them, as you can see here, the little pink dots, then to identify them one by one, to know that two zebras are different individuals and follow them, and so on and so forth. Actually, there is a number of things that we can do in this playground, let's say, a little bit like in a city, you can detect different type of objects, track cars, track pedestrians, classify things, segment. Here is a little bit of the same. Okay, so most of my experience is actually in animal detection and localization. So I will maybe start talking about this very briefly. So basically, this is where we start to develop some AI approaches, but where the main idea is to move from a certain image. So let's say some image space that you can see here. And we want to create a model that you can see here as a number of strange boxes that will eventually lead you to a prediction map that corresponds to a probability of observing an animal. So in this map on the right, everything that is black is basically there is no animal. And everything that is bright, yellow to white, it's where the model thinks that there will be an animal being observed. Of course, there is no magic recipe to convert this image into this animal probability map. It's something that you need to train. Okay, so this machine learning model, this AI model here in between, that needs to make the conversion from the image to the probability map, needs to be learned. Okay, because in here you have a lot of parameters that the model at the beginning doesn't know, so they're completely random. And actually, what will happen is that the model will start from the image, go through the random parameters, make a prediction. It will be very bad at the beginning. And then everywhere you make mistakes, you will send a signal back and try to change this parameter so that this error will decrease. So of course, you will have your prediction and you need a truth You need another map that tells you where the animals actually are. And then by observing images over and over, thousands of hundreds of millions of times, the model will learn the right combination of these parameters. It's a lot of them, and that will lead to the right prediction. Now, it seems like an easy task, but is it really actually? So here you have a picture, and I would like to ask you, and sorry I don't have a poll here, how many animals do you see in the image? Go crazy on the chat, I will be looking. So many people say 5, and they say 6, more than 9, 11, 10. Okay. Okay. I would like to know the person who wrote 32. 1,000. No, come on. Okay, you really went crazy. It's a pleasure to see. So, of course, most of your answers were 5, which is fine, because the 5 animals in the middle are the first thing that you see. And that's okay. But I'm sure that maybe some of you have also seen the others. There are actually 17 animals in this image. And some of them, now you see them, obviously they're there. Some others are maybe more difficult to spot. As you can see, some of them are hiding in the shadow, and those are very difficult to see. So you have been my photo interpreters now, and you've seen that in a few seconds you have given an answer. But if you wanted to get to the correct answer, maybe you will have had to spend some time on it, maybe a minute or two. And this is one image. When we fly a drone over a natural reserve, we have 40,000 of those. And if you need a couple of minutes each, well, this is significant. And not only the animals are difficult to spot, but you have different species that have very different visual cues. So here you can see different species. They don't look the same. And you have also very, very different backgrounds. So as you can see here, this is all from the same data acquisition campaign. And depending on where you're flying with the drone, but sometimes you are on a sandy part, sometimes you are on some dirt, sometimes you're in the river. And as a consequence, the problem becomes very, very complicated, because the model needs to understand all these different situations, and also to be able to detect the animals. So in order to train a right machine learning model, you remember, from the image to the probability map, there is a number of things you can do. And one is, for example, to use a pre-trained model. I don't know if you've had some AI training before here in the summer school, but it's basically using a model that is already been trained on another problem. So you will take basically a model that has seen cats and dogs and airplanes and things like that, and then adapt it. So it already has some parameters that are good at detecting objects, just not wildlife. And then you will try to train it with the data that you have and to be able to detect animals. And then there is a number of other different strategies to make better model training, which are described in this paper. If you're interested, on the interest of time, I will jump to the next slide, which is basically what you can achieve in the end. And as you can see here in this image, this is a project that we run with some colleagues at Quest University in Canada. We were counting migratory birds in Western Africa on an island out in the Atlantic. We flew the drone, we had all the footage, and then we asked our ecology colleagues to come up with an actual estimation of the animals, and then we run our models on the side, and then we compare. But as you can see, it's also possible to have a pretty good estimation of the animal. It's not perfect. I mean, if you look long enough, especially on the image on the right, is quite easy. Sometimes you have multiple detections for a single bird, as you can see here. So it's not perfect, but it gives you an idea, and it gives you an idea in a fraction of the time. We will come back to that in a second. Now, of course, you can design a model, you can train it if you have some kind of AI background, but many of you don't. So I've seen that in the poll, maybe half of you are not familiar with the AI model. So one mission in this space is also to provide software that it will be easy to use, and that any of you can just take it over and use it without being too much concerned about the code that is behind. And there have been a couple of initiatives that have been looking into this. One is called AID, that you can see it here. And AID is an interactive site hosted on Microsoft, but it's completely open source. That has where you can upload the images of your fieldwork campaigns. So they can be remote sensing. So, oh, what have I done? They can be remote sensing based, so maybe drones like this one, or they can be pictures from camera traps. And you could also be willing to do land cover mapping or things like that. So you upload them, and you have a number of models that are already in and already trained. So you will have a deep learning model for semantic segmentation, one for counting, one for classification of the images, and you can use them. And this is like the first level. But if once you are using it, the model will come back to you and show you new images where it's not sure. And then you as a human, you can then label some of the images and help the model improving in a kind of a back and forth manner. Another software for but really specialized in object detection is called Mega Detector. Maybe you have heard of it. And this has been developed by colleagues at MIT, Sarah Beery. And their idea was to take images from camera traps, so all kinds of images, and having a simple object detector that the only thing that it does is to detect animals, humans, vehicle, or if the image is empty. So it's a very simple model, but it's also very powerful because it has been trained by a ton of data and now it's been used by a ton of people that also contribute to it. So now just to show you a couple of applications. So for example, there is Wildlife Protection Solutions that uses it to detect humans and vehicle in images from national park. And this triggers alert to find poachers. Or at the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, they use the mega detector to detect the animals and then go through this million of images. We're talking about 11 million images from 2,000 cameras. And now they are on par with the time of their collection of images. And because they need to review only roughly 15% for uncertain predictions, and all the rest is basically chunked by the AI. And before they had to do it completely by hand. Now, maybe the question that you might have in your mind now is like, is it really a speed up? Like, okay, fair enough. It's everything. It's already acquired. Very good. You can pass all your images in the AI. But if I am in a national park and I'm a ranger, I've often run a terrestrial campaign when I'm flying on an airplane, looking by the window and counting the animals. And this is like a very traditional way to running these population censuses. So this is a work that I wanted to briefly show you. It's has been performed by Alexandra Delplanque, who just actually finished his PhD. Congratulations! And they basically compare a system based on photo interpreters sitting on a plane and counting the animals, which is really the standard in Côte d'Ivoire, to a solution based on machine learning, in this case, a model that Alexandre himself developed called HerdNet. So basically, what he proposed was like that. In a first step, he gets the images acquired by a camera mounted on the plane, and he runs HerdNet, which basically detects the animals. From all this detection got reviewed by an expert, but only the detection, not all the images. And this expert will decide whether there are really animals, not animals, or uncertain. So the person doesn't know. Then after this, the images that are true positives will be passed to a step 2, where the interpreter will actually analyze in detail the full image where these were found, and some new training sample will be found. And the model will be retrained with this new sighting. So this is very similar to what I told you before about AID. It's a kind of an interactive process where the model retrains with some new detections. And thanks to that, the model gets better. So actually, the scale up is quite significant. So this is really the exercise being done in Côte d'Ivoire. So the team of human beings took roughly 6,000 hours to review the full image data set from that was acquired from the airplane survey. While using the AI approach, it was a total time of roughly 100 hours. So we're talking about an order of magnitude speed up, which is something that it's for the first time we see an actual number on how much you can accelerate the work of people in the field. the model tended to underestimate the animals. So here in the y-axis, you have the counts by humans, let's say, and on the x-axis, the counts by the, no, sorry, on the y-axis, the AI, and on the x-axis, the humans. And the humans tend to find more animals than the deep learning model. And so they also made a study of why this was happening. And funnily enough, most of the time, animals are missed because they are hidden by trees. And people on the plane can see them, and they can easily see them because they see the animals moving. While on a camera image, since it's a still camera, if they're hidden, and we don't see it. So that's maybe
sorry to
food for
interrupt.
thought.
We have about 5
Sorry,
more minutes. About
5 minutes.
7 minutes, and then we will leave like 10 minutes for some questions if people have it. If that's okay.
Fair enough. Let's make 10 because 5 seems
Okay. Okay.
difficult. Well, I'll speed up. Okay, so this was for detection and classification, and now what if you want to go deeper in the way that you want to identify, for example, single animals, and some animals have very distinct features that can help you identify if a whale is Paul or is Jeffrey, two different whales. And there is a lot of computer vision that has been used in this case, for example, to match the fluke of the whale. The fluke of the whale is unique. Or in the case of whale shark, to match the different patterns on their body, they're also unique. And there is a lot of initiative, for example, WildMe, which actually uses gamified approaches. So they ask people on the web to play and try to recognize the whales. They have both scanning social medias for videos of your holidays where we have seen a whale shark. And thanks to this, they know where the whale shark was after it has been identified. So there is a lot of work in this space. And this is a lot of challenges because, animals in time, they change. Imagine that your physiology of your face 10 years ago and now, or maybe 20, but you change a lot, and animals change a lot as well. So you can see here in the example of these chimpanzees. And but even with these differences of appearance that happen through time and other problems that maybe a new individual enters a system that was not observed before, and the like, the AI models tend to surpass the humans for the recognition of single individual, which is a strong result, and it's something that, in a way, helps us thinking that this system can make the difference if we want to, track and follow single individuals that could have some specific value or maybe an illness, and we will need to know where they are. Another possible machine learning application is pose estimation. So maybe you're not interested by detecting the animal, you're not interested by recognizing which individual it is, but you want to know how it moves. And for this, there is a number of technology that aims at estimating the pose, which is the recognition of different body parts in a video. Okay, so there is this fantastic software called BeepLabCat that I invite you to check out, where they basically work on recognizing these joints and making them predictable on a sequence of videos. And behind the scenes, it's not something so different to what I showed you before for the animal detection case. So you have some image entering a system with a lot of parameters, and when it outputs a series of probability maps, and every probability maps correspond to a part of the body. So it will be like the probability of the hand, the probability of the shoulder, and so on and so forth. It's more complicated than that. Of course, we work on videos, not on images, but so that you get the gist of it. And this is very powerful because it allows you a lot of clinical experiments. My colleagues, Alex and Mackenzie Maddox, work a lot in the lab with mice, but they also have recently brought it to the outside, for example, for characterizing the pose of wild animals in the wild. And this is a really cool project. I really invite you to have a look. Now, if we don't think about animals, but about the environment, the animals live in the environment, they interact with it. So sometimes you want to be able to characterize this context with a series of digital sensors. And here we fall again into remote sensing. And in order to have some 3D understanding of the environment, you can use a number of sensors. For example, a LiDAR, which is a laser, and basically records the position of every laser beams, which allows you to make a 3D reconstruction of the scene. And you can do it with a laser. You can also do it with cameras, which can be, for example, what we call photogrammetry. You will have a camera that will be moving around, and by detecting points of interest on each images, it will allow you be able to match them and then creating a 3D model. For example, here, some colleagues have been tracking ants. And in order to track ants, they needed to first reconstruct the environment to avoid, to be able to track the ant and not a root of a tree and so on and so forth. We also work a little bit on that, and this is an image a video that I like to show. This is our projects in the Red Sea when we work on coral reefs. And here, for example, we make a 3D reconstruction of the reef that is done in real time by a video taken by a GoPro camera. So here on the top left, you can see by the video of the GoPro that we take while we are diving. Here on the right, you can see which type of corals we are observing and what is their state of health. Are they alive? Are they dead? Are they bleached? And then thanks to a prediction of the depth, so of the depth at which the coral is observed, we create a 3D model, one frame at a time. Let me just go maybe a little bit further away in the 3D model. So you can see as soon as you see a new frame of the video, it gets projected in a 3D model. Then it's a complete digital twin of the reef that you can move, you can zoom in, zoom out, and study for seeing the biodiversity of the area. Nice. And then when you have all this, you can basically put everything together. And then having the 3D model, the species, the bioanalysis, the tracking, and try to have a holistic view of an environment where you can, when you can assess biodiversity, assess conservation strategy, fighting poaching, all with the digital system. For the sake of time, I will jump species distribution models, and I will jump to the concluding remarks. So I hope you have appreciated this very quick tour on the world of biodiversity, and the final question is like, what can we do better, right? So I think there is a number of things we should improve. So on one hand, we need to be better to better care to biases. We are very good at acquiring data with digital sources, for example, citizen science, as you can see here with iNaturalist, but all this data have biases that are there at all levels. It can be regional biases. In some areas of the world, mostly in the north, you have more data, while most of the biodiversity is in the tropics, for example. You have, and all these biases need to be understood and also injected in models. More and more people use large language models, and also in biodiversity, this is happening. This is one example of a wild clip from Gabeth and colleagues. And also here, we need to understand that when we use models based on language, we inherit the biases of language models, which are human-centered, with data that come also from specific geographic areas, and so on and so on. Open data, yes, of course, I love open source. I always open source my codes, but for the data, a bit of care it's important, because if you start opening all the data you acquire in natural reserves, if I'm a poacher, I will join your crowdsourcing experiments, so I will know exactly where the animals are. So you need a little bit to think about where these images will end and who will have access to them in order to protect the animals by what you're doing and not expose them because you want to do some fancy AI. Also remember that every time you predict something, it's not just predicting, you need to provide uncertainty. So you need to really have some quality control and the limitation of the AI. Now we're seeing a bit of a run of to AI models that are bigger, fatter, and with more parameters and more performing. But these big models are very, very big black boxes, but we can live with that if they perform. But having some kind of explainability is important. And also, please think about the cost of this model, how much energy, how much water they use, because if you are into this business of climate change AI, it's because we want to limit emission and make good for the planet. So if by doing the fancy AI, we end up emitting more than we are actually saving, the calculation, for me at least, doesn't really work anymore. And finally, there is a need to build a community, and this community needs to be interdisciplinary. And there are a lot of initiatives in this space that exist. For example, Wild Drone around the drones for conservation, bioacoustic AI, and all these communities gravitate around climate change AI, and are definitely something interesting to check out for you. We also have a big Slack together with Sarah Beery. I mean, it's mostly her. I'm taking credit when I don't deserve it. If you want to be part of it, just send me an email and I'll send you an invite. We have a few thousand people there. We discuss conservation and biodiversity issues with AI, and it's very cool. And I think I'll stop here. So I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something useful. And well, just remember, the threats of biodiversity are real, and they impact us all. Directly, indirectly, it doesn't matter. They do impact us all. We have now all these sensors that give us a lot of observational power, and they give us this unique situation where we can provide science-based results to decision maker that can make the right call. We can monitor life above and under water with AI. It's also pretty cool. It's not just fancy AI. It's also good experiences, good opportunities, very interdisciplinary teams, and I think this is basically the best place to be. Thank you very much, and I'm here to answer your question. And yeah, thanks for your attention. It was a pleasure to, even if I didn't see you, to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Devis. Thank you so much for your time. I think it was a wonderful lecture. I personally learned a lot. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just like ask like 2 questions from the chats that we have got, and then maybe
Fantastic.
we can follow up later. So there's one question which I'll club into like one question. It's regarding remote sensing.
Yeah.
Like there are questions like how do you actually get that data? Like whom do you go to? Like which platforms? The second is how do you combine it with like drone imagery so that you can get more higher resolution images? And what is the usual resolution of satellite images that people work with for training images? For
Right.
training models?
Okay. So first of all, where do you get the data? I mean, this is the endless question, right? So it depends on the resolution that you need. So if you're okay in working at 10 meters, for example, you can get the Sentinel-2 images for free from the Sentinel Hub. And this is a portal where you basically select your area and you can see the latest acquisition and you can download them directly. But of course, 10 meters is, for wildlife conservation is not enough. You need to go higher. But for many other applications, it's more than enough. I mean, if you're doing climate modeling at the global scale, then you want to use MODIS data, 1 kilometer, it doesn't matter. So in that case, all these data are free of charge, and you can find them on the USGS website, on Google Earth Engine. There is a lot of platforms that basically allow you to access all this data for free. Now, if you need high resolution data, this is a bit of a different story. So it all depends on the footprints you need to cover. But usually you're working on at the scale of a single reserve. Maybe it's not too big. So in that case, you can work with your own drones if you have one. So in that case, you can have 5-10 centimeters data by flying your drone yourself and acquiring the image. If you need the satellite data for it, you can, for example, look for Planet data. If you are a student, Planet has a very good program for students where you can access quite a lot of their data for free. So this means data at 3-meter resolution, which is, then you can super resolve it with some AI algorithms, for example, and put it down at 1 meter. And this, you have a quota per month as a student, and it's something you can download yourself. Otherwise, you need to buy them. And maybe for a specific project, you have some budget for buying some data. And in that case, you can acquire it yourself. Unfortunately, when the resolution gets very high, you need to deal with companies, and companies, I mean, they're not there for philanthropy. So sometimes you can get some data through some programs. I know Maxar is a program for where they do images for good, and this helps you acquiring data in situation where you would not have those. So that was the data availability. What was the rest?
Because I think the resolution which we talked about, like
Yeah,
what
okay.
resolution you usually train models with.
Yeah. So it depends. It really depends on the problem. When we detect animals in national reserves, we have this drone data of 5 centimeters. We usually downgrade it to 10 because, or even 15 because you don't need the 5 centimeter pixel. But I mean, we didn't observe a significant improvement. Then in other applications, when we detect single trees here in Switzerland, we have a 50 centimeters aerial data. When we work at deforestation at the level of the whole of the tropics, then we take the sentinel data that are 10-meter resolution, and we classify maybe 1 kilometer grids by using the 10-meter resolution pixels that gives you the texture of the trees to understand if the area has been deforested or not. So it's really problem specific. It's difficult to give an answer like that. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. There's one more question. How accessible is the data to the AI and machine learning practitioners, especially in developing countries like Africa, who want to use build tools for biodiversity conservation? Like, how accessible is the data?
There is a very lively community. They're willing to share, willing to co-develop. For example, in this AI for conservation blog, there is a lot of people who are there for making these things happen. And for example, I think Dan Morris is really a central person. He runs this Lila, the science website, where he puts data and labels for a lot of sorry, where he has a lot of this data set out there, AI ready with the labels, and you can start training models. So I think a good starting point will be to either join the AI for Conservation blog, Slack, sorry, or to go on Lila.science and start exploring the data sets.
Perfect. There was just one last question. Like if you're talking about camera trapping, what criteria do you decide like where to place the camera and what factors influence that?
This is a tough one. It depends a lot on the number of cameras you have and what's the purpose of your analysis. I mean, of course, it's always better to put the cameras on the trees because the animals see them less. But if you are in an area where there are no trees, then you need to put a pole with a camera on, and very often the animals are disturbed by it. So I would say place the cameras so that they can cover as much ground as possible. If you don't have any 3D or any need for seeing the animal from different sides for some texturing, well, make sure that there is no overlap in the fields of view. For example, the project we run, we need the overlap in the fields of view, so we put the cameras that are concurrent, but actually you can very well make them look aside so you can cover more ground. So it's a number of those things. Don't put the camera behind some vegetation because when it moves, it makes the camera trigger. This type of things. And then it's doing by experience and you will figure it out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Devis. We really appreciate you giving your time and sharing your knowledge with us. Again, thank you so much.
The pleasure was mine.
Thank you so much. And August, you're welcome to stay on the call if you want to. And
Cheers. Thank you.
Devis, thank you. So we'll move on to the next lecture. But before that, let me share my slides. Okay, just some housekeeping things again. If you have any general questions, please post them on the chat. But if any questions for the lecture, please ask them in the Q&A channel. Like here, that's where we are actually monitoring questions. And if your question is already there in some form, we recommend doing upvotes so that that question gets more likelihood of being asked. Okay, we'll move on to our next lecture by Dr. Lily. Dr. Lily, welcome to the summer school. Thank you for joining us. So the lecture 2 will be on AI for conservation decisions. So Dr. Lily Zhu is a computer scientist developing AI methods across machine learning, optimization, and causal inference for planetary health challenges, with a focus on poaching and wildlife conservations. She partners closely with non-governmental organizations to bridge gaps between research and practice. Um, Dr. Lily received a PhD in computer science from Harvard, and she will be starting as a postdoc at the University of Oxford in August 2024. And she will be joining as an assistant professor in Columbia University next year. So congratulations for your appointments, Dr. Lily, and the floor is all yours. and we can see your slides.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself while I was in screen share. Hello, thank you so much, Aditya and all of the organizers of Climate Change AI and the summer school. It's really a pleasure to be here and see 300 people who are so enthusiastic about developing new AI methods and applying existing AI methods to all sorts of applications within climate. And as Devis has spoken about, and as I will discuss a little bit more here, biodiversity conservation is an essential part of climate change. And Devis just gave a really, really wonderful overview of a lot of opportunities and existing work in computer vision and predictive machine learning technologies on biodiversity monitoring and interpretation. And after we have a better sense of where the species are, what landscape look like, where deforestation is happening, we need to translate that into action and figure out what kind of decisions can we now make that's effectively making use of the insights that we found from this monitoring. So that's what I'll focus on. But for anybody who is newly joining, I will give a very quick overview of the motivation for this work. So our planet is experiencing an extreme crisis in biodiversity in tandem with the climate crisis. So in the past 50 years, we've seen a 70% average decline in the population of vertebrate species. And the UN has estimated that there's currently 1 million species in danger of extinction out of only 8 million species that exist on our planet. So it's an urgent challenge and one where we need to act immediately. And especially relevant to this audience, I want to emphasize that the biodiversity crisis is a climate crisis and that these two challenges are very interrelated in both directions. So first, climate change impacts biodiversity. So with different degrees of climate warming, this really impacts where species range can be and what habitats are suitable for different populations. And as we get to these higher thresholds of climate projections, with 3 degrees Celsius warming, for example, 41% of all mammals will lose half their habitat. So just imagine the repercussions to biodiversity and wildlife. But in the reverse direction, biodiversity also has a significant impact on climate change mitigation and adaptation. So one estimate from PNAS shows that biodiversity and the services it provides can actually be a significant contributor to adjusting to the climate crisis by mitigating about 37% of the CO2 emissions necessary to halt climate change and keep it to the 2 degrees warming mandated by the Paris Agreement. And the way that biodiversity is able to do all of this for climate is through the eco-services that it provides. So the IPBES, which is the UN equivalent of the IPCC for biodiversity, put out a big report in 2019, and many organizations responded with their own reports talking about how biodiversity is relevant for development, for food and agriculture, for the economy. And some examples of specifically how biodiversity can contribute to climate change mitigation is through the fact that our land and oceans absorb half of all carbon emissions, and the other half is left in the atmosphere. Further deforestation and land use change is turning the Amazon from a carbon sink into a carbon source. So now instead of sequestering carbon, forest through land clearing and burning is now emitting carbon. And then the wildlife species that habitates these landscapes are actually contributing directly to climate change mitigation through landscape architects such as elephants, which will put trees over to create carbon stores and at really effective above ground carbon storage. And beyond climate, biodiversity provides a wide range of ecosystem services, including livelihoods from ecotourism and resources provided by the land, helps with human health by giving us clean air and water and also preventing pandemic spread, and providing food security. And we've witnessed recently increased attention towards biodiversity. So in 2022, we had the kind of biodiversity equivalent of the Paris Agreement with the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was ratified by 196 nations worldwide. And one of the hallmark agreements of this framework is the 30 by 30 initiative, which is a commitment to increase the amount of land and ocean that is designated as protected to 30% by 2030. So this is roughly a doubling of the current amount of land and oceans from 17 and 8% of the world's surface that we've committed to increasing in the next now 6 years. So things are happening really fast. A lot of governments are bringing both energy and resources and money to this table. So it's a very effective time to be acting now. Okay, but some of the big challenges that we're facing with biodiversity. But just to poll the audience, please put in the chat some of the challenges that you see as important and urgent for biodiversity conservation today.
Okay, let's see if something is...
Okay.
Wildfires. Can you see the chat, please?
It's there we go. Yes. Okay. Wildfires funding. Okay. Yeah, it's difficult to measure. Lobbyism, changes in the ecosystem of plastic. Yeah. Okay. So this is really wonderful because it's both a combination of like challenges from the ecosystem level, like deforestation and monocropping and invasive species and poaching, but then also the like data challenges of like verifying data, quantifying uncertainty. Wonderful. Okay. So let me just give a quick overview of the five key drivers of biodiversity loss as determined by the IPBES. So the first are changes in land and sea use. And agriculture is the biggest driving force to the changes in land use. And agriculture is a direct threat to over 85% of the species that are currently in risk of extinction. Second is the direct exploitation of the species and timber. So this is through logging and poaching, which is the harvest of wild animals such as elephants and tigers for the legal market, but then also the consumption of bushmeat and poaching as a result of that. Invasive species, as folks have mentioned. Climate change is one of the 5 biggest drivers of biodiversity loss, and pollution as well. So this is everything from chemical pollutants such as insecticides to also like plastics and other physical pollutants. Okay, but then the levers that we have to reverse this biodiversity crisis includes protected areas. So this is like the key hallmark of the 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of the world's land and oceans. Promoting alternative livelihoods so that poaching, for example, is like less attractive, and also educating communities about the importance of conservation and the fact that, for example, shark fins and rhino horns are not actually healthy or beneficial for you. The challenges of human-wildlife conflict, where people will retaliate against animals that they believe to be a threat, such as a jaguar that has attacked some of their livestock, for example, and moving from human-wildlife conflict to peaceful coexistence. Species reintroduction and translocation. So this is recognizing that the original habitats of some animals have changed, and now there's no longer animals present in those spaces. So how can we bring that animal back, whether it's elephants or tigers or other keystone species? Conservation financing, so actually bringing money in to protected areas and the communities around these lands, and then addressing other indirect drivers. So anything that we can do to reduce climate change or better manage water or reduce poverty, therefore all benefit conservation as well. Okay, So now that we kind of understand what the conservation challenges are, let's think about what we can do about it. So just to give an overview of where and how AI plays a role in conservation, there's 3 key components. So the first is monitoring, which Devis gave a really wonderful overview of just now. And some questions associated with monitoring are answering things like population counts, like what is the population of a certain species, and tracking questions like is the population going up or down over time. There is planning. So planning addresses questions like which lands maximize protection for snow leopards, and actually identifying which lands should we be conserving and how can we most effectively use our limited budget to do so. And then finally, after we've taken some action, we want to evaluate how effective our action was on the ground through impact evaluation. So this could help answer questions like, do community managed areas reduce elephant poaching? And this is actually trying to figure out, is the action we took effective and should we continue doing that or try something else, for example? This oftentimes uses techniques like causal inference. So looking at these 3 core challenges where AI can contribute to conservation, we can really lay this out on a pipeline from data to decision-making and moving all the way to evaluation. So for monitoring, going from data to building a model of what the environment looks like, this is where we can use techniques like computer vision, statistics, and predictive machine learning. After we build a model, we can translate this into effective decisions using techniques from optimization, reinforcement learning, and operations research. And then after we've taken those decisions, now we want to use causal inference and econometrics to evaluate the impact of those actions. And in this talk about conservation decisions, we'll really focus on the planning and evaluation side of this pipeline. Okay. So a little bit of history into conservation decision-making. A lot of conservation management is founded under these like more these decision trees, which basically lay out more manually a set of variables and questions to ask yourself to understand what kind of actions you should be taking. So this is an example from the U.S. Food and Agriculture Organization that is figuring out how should you effectively manage your peatlands depending on what the soils look like. So there's various, you can kind of follow this flow chart to understand, okay, from the current state of what I have, what is the next action I should be taking? So this is the kind of the most basic type of algorithm that can be used for decision-making. It's just following a decision tree. And as probably many of you know, a decision tree is also, if you scale it up, like an example of a more straightforward predictive machine learning algorithm. But we'll talk today about more sophisticated techniques in AI that can also be applied to conservation decisions. So part of why decision trees aren't sufficient is because conservation decisions are really hard and have a lot of complexity that we have to overcome. So first, it's really important that our decisions are effective. And this is because we have very limited resources and very limited money with which to make these decisions. And biodiversity is such an urgent challenge, and we're losing species at an immense rate in this current 6th mass extinction. So it's very high stakes, and it's important that we act quickly. But there's many challenges that pervade making effective decisions. So the first, we have a very, very large scale in which we're trying to operate, which is at the highest level global. We have incomplete information, so we don't know the species populations. We don't know exactly like which humans are living there or relying on the land. So that introduces uncertainty into these models. We have really complex interaction effects. So with climate change, it's a very complex system, but ultimately the number that matters is parts per million of CO2 equivalent particulates that are in the atmosphere. And due to atmospheric mixing, everything will kind of combine. And it's really just like this one number that impacts climate change on a global scale. with biodiversity, there's so many different interaction effects of different species and the habitats that they live in, and then the temperature of that landscape, and which humans are interacting with that landscape. So there's not kind of one number or one metric that is the root of what we're trying to measure and impact. So just the scale of the challenge and the complexity of the challenge is much more difficult than climate, for example. And part of that is that we have many stakeholders who all have competing incentives. Okay. So before I introduce the 6 core decision-making methods I want to talk about today, I want to first ask you all what types of decision-making methods are you familiar with? So everybody should have at least one answer, which is decision trees, which we just, thank you, Sandro, gave this example of. Okay, democratic decision-making, I like that. RL with human feedback. Okay, multi-criteria decision-making, wonderful. Logistic, regression, ensembles, random forests, wonderful. Waterfalls, causal. Okay, design thinking, I really like that. Game theory, wonderful. Okay, min-max game theory. Okay, we have a lot of experts of various sorts in this audience. Okay, so the 6 core methods that I'll focus on today, which I see as very applicable and with a lot of both direct applicability, but also a lot of potential for conservation, are these 6: optimization, market design, online learning, reinforcement learning, addressing and overcoming uncertainty, and causal inference. And of course, this is not a complete set, but I selected these based on their relevance to the kind of challenges that we see in conservation, the use that they've had so far, such as in optimization and market design, but then also the potential that some of these have, such as online learning and reinforcement learning, where many methods have not really been applied to conservation challenges, but there's a lot of potential due to the relevance of what these methods are trying and able to solve and what conservation needs. Okay. So we'll start off with optimization. And for each of these methods, I'll give you some classic examples of where these methods are applied, and then I'll translate that to how these methods might be relevant for conservation. So for optimization, we all interact with this very regularly. So this is what tells us the shortest path to take from one place to another with Google Maps. It's used in air traffic control. So this is determining which flights will go at what time is solving a really complex optimization task that each airline has to solve on a regular basis to schedule their flights and also schedule the pilots and flight attendants that are on all of those flights. And in conservation, a key example of where optimization has been used is in land prioritization, largely, and the key example here being the Markson software that has been a widely used form of conservation software that helps us pick the most relevant and important lands to purchase based on some kind of budget constraint. And what optimization does for us is it specifies a set of possible decision strategies and some performance measure that we want to maximize, such as landscape connectivity, and then uses computational methods to efficiently search the space of possible actions that we can take. So the format that optimization comes in is we specify a set of decision variables, which are the parameters of this model, which can be discrete or continuous. We have to specify an objective that we want to maximize. And then we set whatever our constraints are. So these are limits on what the variables can take on. And to give an example of how optimization is already a tool that we're using every day, optimization is the foundation of machine learning algorithms. So a neural network is really just solving an optimization question where the decision variables are the weights of a neural network. The objective in a classification task, for example, is to maximize the number of data points that are correctly labeled. And then here we don't have any constraints on what these weights can take on, other than the fact that they can be continuous. But then beyond machine learning algorithms, optimization is really core to decision-making and conservation. So with this example of Markson and land conservation, the decision variables we have are specific parcels of land to conserve. We want to maximize habitat connectivity, while the constraints are some kind of budget that we have where we can't spend more than our budget. Okay. And the way that optimization is often used and intersected with machine learning is through this paradigm known as predict then optimize. So we start off with the data, we build a predictive algorithm using our favorite type of machine learning to build a model. And then from that model, we'll then use optimization tools to come to some decision. And to use an example from my work, so a lot of my research has focused on machine learning for poaching prevention. So the challenge here is to predict where poachers are placing snares in a protected area. So we can use machine learning to train a predictive model based on past observations of where rangers found snares. Where do we predict poachers will place snares in the coming months based on all the landscape and remote sensing data that we have that tells us information about climate and precipitation and so on. And then based on this predictive model, then we use this to optimize ranger patrols and figure out what is the optimum path that rangers should be taking. Because the constraint that we have here is we have a limited number of rangers and they only have so many hours that they can go on patrol in a single week. Okay. So our next decision-making tool kit here is market design. So classic examples of market design are matching systems that assigns riders to drivers, for example, as used by these global systems such as Didi and Uber, and in hospitals to assign kidney donors to patients. And the challenge here is we have, everybody has their own preferences as to like how much they want to spend on a ride. Drivers want to make more money. Riders want to spend as little money as possible. So then the market in the middle is this rideshare platform like Uber or Didi, which decides like, okay, how can we negotiate between these two misaligned incentives to make sure that people are overall happy and that the system works. And then translating market design questions to conservation, we have payments for ecosystem services, which provide landowners a certain amount of money to not deforest their land, for example, recognizing that the value that society gets from keeping that land intact is actually some monetary value that can then be used to compensate the landowner in lieu of getting money from timber harvesting. Then they instead get these repeated payments for keeping their land intact. And we also have examples of the kind of reverse, where we're designing auctions to purchase parcels of land to increase connectivity of a certain species habitat, in this case of turtle dove habitats. Okay, so market design is really challenging because we have many distinct players who have their own incentives. So in the case of payments to ecosystem services, we have landowners, we have industry, which is the timber industry, and then we have people far away. So this is a picture of Jakarta. And these people benefit from the land being intact, but there's no way to directly get money from people in Jakarta who are benefiting from like the carbon sequestration and the clean air that this land provides. And the key challenge here, to use a term from economics, is that in systems like conservation, a lot of the benefits that come from these ecosystem services are positive externalities that can't be captured by any one individual. So these positive externalities are all these ecosystem services that no one person or no industry can like benefit from. And this compares to, for example, in climate change, where there's electric vehicles that can be developed, and then there are still positive externalities, but there's also the direct benefit of like, yes, we are producing a vehicle that one person can purchase and benefit from, and then that money will go towards that individual. So then the goal of market design is to design systems that incentivize desirable behavior and captures that positive externality to ensure that the system is efficient. So finding a way to compensate landowners in a way such that they will actually do the action that is societally beneficial, which is keeping their land intact. So yeah, we have ecosystem service providers here and the beneficiaries, and the ecosystem service providers provide services such as water, carbon capture, habitat conservation, and erosion management. And then those beneficiaries will then compensate those providers in some way. And this program has been widely adopted by this program called RED, REDD+, which is funded by the Norwegian government to provide money for landowners all across Latin America. Okay, so our next topic is online learning. And online learning is different than the type of online learning that you all are doing right now, in which you're sitting in on a lecture that is online. This is online machine learning, which is used very regularly for email spam filtering. So here we have new data that is coming, what we call online. So every day, email providers such as Gmail receive new instances of mail that is either spam or not spam. And then Gmail has to decide, okay, should I put this in your inbox or should I put it in your spam folder? And then over time, like, because we help label whether or not something is spam, we are constantly providing Gmail feedback as to whether or not it's actually spam. But then they still have to, tomorrow, they still have to like make this new decision of whether to show you an email or not. And we have recommender systems from music providers to dating apps to ad providers that are all using online learning. And in conservation, where online learning has been used is in my own work of developing multi-arm bandit algorithms to determine how to send rangers on patrols in protected areas. So what online learning is this process of learning models incrementally from data as new samples arrive. And this compares to other forms of learning with repeated updates, such as batch learning. So batch learning in the context of machine learning is where we first train a machine learning model, then use that to take some action, and that action will in turn give us new samples. And then we will continue to act over time. So for example, the model that we train might be a computer vision classifier of trying to determine whether or not a data set contains one of 10 different species of interest. And then we'll constantly get new data back from our camera traps. And then over time, after we've labeled a new batch of these samples, then we'll retrain our model. And then this gives us the exact classifier better overall. And then we'll try to label new instances, and then we'll keep collecting new data. And then every batch of information, then we'll do this active retraining. But in comparison, online learning is the act of creating some estimate of what a label or what the expected value of taking some action is, and then acting immediately. And then after we take that action, then we understand, okay, like what happened here, and use that to update our estimates every sample. So in the example from my work with online learning for ranger patrol planning, the estimation we have is creating an estimate of every point in the park and what the predicted probability of poaching is for that instance. And then the following day or week, then we'll actually send rangers out on patrol, and then they'll observe whether or not there is poaching. And then that data immediately gets fed back to our system so that the following day, when we're creating a new decision of where to send rangers out to, we are already incorporating that new information rather than waiting for an entire batch of data. So online learning is very useful in contexts where there's some action that has to be taken at repeated time steps in a very iterative fashion. And it can also be combined with human expert feedback by integrating, by using that expert feedback either as labels or as a seed to initialize our estimates. And some examples, key methods in online learning, if this is something that feels relevant to your work and you want to do further exploration, are multi-armed bandits and also unsupervised methods of machine learning, such as clustering or density estimation. Okay. Okay. Now let's go. Every point here we're going like slightly increased complexity. So optimization was really thinking about like static settings. And then we had online learning, which is now like working in like iterative fashions. And now reinforcement learning brings us into additional complexity because now we're working in dynamic settings. So examples of where reinforcement learning has been used, you all have probably heard of like big news from back in 2015, where we had AI algorithms beat the world's experts in chess. And by now this is old news, but at that time, that was kind of like one of the first key examples of reinforcement learning really achieving human level mastery at a scale. And now reinforcement learning is the foundational AI technique behind self-driving cars as they're being developed. And then in conservation, reinforcement learning can be applied to settings such as fisheries management, where we have actions that we have to take in this dynamic setting, and also precision agriculture. And let me talk about what reinforcement learning is and why this is the case. So reinforcement learning, or RL, is learning in real time through repeated interactions with the environment. So we have some agent who is our decision maker, and we have the environment that the agent is interacting with. And the environment will inform the agent of this is the current state of the world, and the agent will take some action, and the environment will give the agent back some reward and an updated version of the state, and then the agent will take some new action, and it continues in this iterative fashion every time step with new data. And let me concretize this using an example from fisheries management. The agent here is the regulator who has to take some action to determine how should we protect this like marine area. And then the environment is a marine ecosystem that the regulator is trying to help conserve. So the marine ecosystem, has the current state is the fish populations of the different species. And the regulator will look at these current populations and say, okay, what is a sustainable level of harvest that we can allow for this next fishing season? And then the regulator will then set fishing licenses for this is how many trout that you can collect in this next year. And then the reward that we get is the overall ecosystem integrity. But what's really important here in fishery management is that what the regulator is focused on is not just what is the fish population next year, but we really care about what is the fish population in 20 years or in some long time horizon. And the quality and the number of fish 20 years down the line depends on the actions we took a year before that, and 2 years before that, and 3 years before that, all the way up until today. So it's really recognizing that the impacts of our actions propagate really far down the line. So that is the key challenge behind reinforcement learning algorithms, that we're operating in these dynamic environments where there's a really sequential decision that's being made. And the choice of action that impacts both the immediate success, so how many fish are there tomorrow, but then also the ability to learn and collect high utility from the environment in our future actions many, many years from now. Okay. And to just give another example of this. So let's imagine this is the state of the world today, and there's some intervention that we want to take. And the goal is to get our world into some like idealized future state. And the things that we might care about are the animal density or the ecosystem status. And we want to understand like what intervention can we effectively take to bring us into some future amount of density or ecosystem status that is better than what we are today, as measured by some objective that we can specify. So we can call this notion of what the ecosystem looks like today as the state. The intervention is our action. And then the future density is this next state of the environment. And the objective can be measured by a reward. And this terminology and this cyclical pattern of going state, action, next state, that yields some reward is known in computer science as a Markov decision process, or MDP. And this MDP is like the foundation of reinforcement learning algorithms, and it's also the crux of a lot of concepts in ecology, and is the foundation of a lot of work in theoretical ecology that really models ecosystems as this dynamic system where the state of the environment will change according to some action that we're taking. So this specifying an MDP enables you to then apply reinforcement learning algorithms on top of this model of the environment that you've specified in order to figure out what is the action that we should be taking at each step. Okay. And the second to last thing, method that I wanted to share today about decision-making with AI is causal inference. So causal inference is probably a more familiar term to many of you, and is the foundation of a lot of medical interventions. So anytime that the government will test new drugs, they'll evaluate how does this new drug compare to a placebo, because we actually want to understand the impact of the drug alone in isolation on the health outcome of some human. And causal inference is also used for all sorts of policy questions, including in education, to answer questions like, what is the impact of classroom size on student learning outcomes? And a really wonderful example of how causal inference has been applied to conservation is in studying payments for ecosystem services and whether or not they're actually effective. Because this idea of giving people money to not cut down trees sounds like it's not really sustainable, and maybe there's a lot of ways that you can kind of cheat the system and still get your money while still cutting down trees. But what this 2017 paper from Science shows is they ran a controlled experiment in Uganda and found that indeed payments for ecosystem services does reduce the amount of deforestation in a group of 30 villages that they studied. Okay, and causal inference is the study of cause and effect relationships. So we have some treatment that we're applying. In the context of PES, it's giving annual payments to landowners. And then the outcome that we want to measure is deforestation among the land that is owned by those landowners. And as we all know, correlation does not equal causation. So we want to understand what this causal effect is based on this black arrow. But the reason this is challenging is because there could be confounding variables that are either measurable or unmeasurable that actually impact both the treatment and outcome. And the potential presence of confounders mean that we might just be observing an association rather than a causal link. And confounders here for payments for ecosystem services might include the changing cost of timber. So maybe timber goes up or down. There could be drought in the environment, or there's new infrastructure that is built, such as roads, that make it more desirable or easier to deforest. And in order to overcome this challenge of correlation does not equal causation, we require counterfactual reasoning to actually understand if I didn't, for one landowner that I paid, I can measure how much land that they have after this year. But if I did not pay this exact landowner, how much land would there be? And you can't compare this landowner to a different landowner because there could be systematic differences. Like perhaps the other landowner, like lives closer to roads, for example, or has like an easier access to seller of timber. And because we can't duplicate the world, because we can't create parallel universes with two of the exact same landowners, we need causal inference, which is the art of estimating what this counterfactual would be. And approaches for doing so include randomized controlled trials, such as that which was implemented in Uganda to evaluate PES, or in cases where we don't have money or the ability to run an actual experiment, then we can use other tools in the toolbox, including instrumental variables, regression discontinuity in design, or difference in differences, to take observational data, so data that has already been collected, and figure out ways to control the system in such a way that we can actually get a measurement of what the treatment effect is, even though we don't run an experiment.
Lily, can we, maybe it's like 8 more minutes? We'll probably leave like 10 minutes for Q&A if that's possible.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're on time for that. Okay. So maybe I'll skip over this question so that we can save questions to the end. But the very last method that I want to talk about is dealing with uncertainty, because Devis mentioned earlier that uncertainty is very prevalent in machine learning models, and it's important to quantify uncertainty. So now that we've quantified uncertainty, how do we take that uncertainty in decision making and factor in that uncertainty into whatever actions that we're taking on the ground? So here's a classic example of how uncertainty has been implemented in a healthcare setting, where there's radiation therapy treatment that's being implemented on this brain scan. And the challenge is that the patient, when this brain is being scanned, the patient might move a little bit, so then it's hard to get like a very precise measurement. So how do you factor in the potential like movement of a patient in order to actually identify like where the radiation therapy needs to be implemented? And in conservation, there's a lot of work of quantifying uncertainty in species distribution models, of figuring out like not only where we think species numbers are, but how confident we are for each region of the world about that estimate. Good. Now that we have uncertainty, how do we make decisions from there? So let's go back to these ideas in optimization that we were looking at. So here's, again, our optimization task of maximizing some objective subject to some constraints. And to use the same example as before of landscape connectivity, our objective is to maximize habitat connectivity subject to some constraints, such as a spending budget. Perhaps we have to protect at least 30% of a jaguar's habitat, and perhaps we have to preserve some fixed quantity of indigenous land. So these various constraints will kind of draw a box around what our feasible action space is. So then our feasible action space is the intersection of all of these constrained lines. But then we can solve for our objective, which is maximizing habitat connectivity within this feasible action space, which gives us the optimal action that we should be taking. But if we now introduce uncertainty into this model, we can have uncertainty in either the objective, so there's uncertainty about exactly where the animals are. So how do we know what the habitat connectivity is? What if instead this is jaguar habitat versus this is not jaguar habitat? What if there's like, okay, there's like a 50 to 60% chance that jaguars do exist here, and then among the constraints we have uncertainty about what the cost of the land is, and also like exactly what the habitat composition might be. Okay, so now this uncertainty will change our feasible action space from like a really nice polygon to this range of possible polygons. So then robust optimization is the art of solving these optimization problems with very specified sets of uncertainty. Okay, so to wrap things up, I am just sharing on this slide, and I think these slides will all be available, so you can look into this further. If any of these topics are of particular interest to you, I've described here like deeper extensions of all these methods. And in particular, I picked topics that I feel like are most relevant for conservation and climate challenges. But then as we're doing all of this work, it's very important, as Devis also mentioned, that we do so thoughtfully and ethically. Because if we are going to be operating the scale that conservation decisions now demand, with increasing the amount of protected area to 30% and taking rapid action at a global scale, we have to make sure that the benefits of conservation are equally spread among humans all over the world. So one particular challenge, one particular consideration about decision-making and conservation is that when we develop algorithmic systems, we can think like, okay, this gives us like a really easy task to follow. We can just use this and use this to direct humans. But it's really important to recognize that these algorithmic systems are imperfect. They are based on some like abstract model of the world that is not perfectly representative of the complexities of everything that's on the ground. And that the humans on the ground, whether they are rangers or indigenous communities or local communities, have so much more context and information. So any algorithmic system that we develop should really be aids that serve as recommendations to humans and not replacements to the humans on the ground. And the addendum to that is the people with experience on the ground have extreme expertise, and this includes cultural context that they have from living and being part of that community, and the lived experience that they have from interacting with that land that should be recognized and incorporated ideally into our AI decision-making systems if possible. That involvement of bringing in those local communities and stakeholders should be empowering of them and should recognize their expertise and perhaps compensate them for their time and not be exploitative in the way that some participatory methods can be. Recognizing that the data that we have is imperfect and leads to oftentimes to bias in our downstream decisions. And I also want to highlight a growing movement known as conservation data justice, which is both in the academic world and conservation in practice, that is trying to figure out how can we actually like recognize and overcome the fact that the data in conservation is very biased, and how can we move towards a world that is more just in the context of conservation. Okay, so I'm closing here with a summary of what we discussed today, of what the pipeline looks like in starting from data in conservation and moving all the way to decisions and evaluation. And today we focused on going from a model that came from some predictive algorithm to decisions using some set of optimization or reinforcement learning, and then moving from decisions to evaluating the impact of our actions using causal inference. I'm also leaving here my information about me and how to contact me on my website or Twitter, and you can also find my email there. And I want to mention that, as Aditya said at the beginning, I will be joining as an assistant professor at Columbia University next year, and I will be recruiting PhD students. So if there's anybody who's applying to PhD programs this cycle who's really interested in AI, especially decision-making tools for conservation and sustainability, please consider applying to Columbia and joining my lab. I'd be really happy to talk more about that. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll open up for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lily. It was wonderful. This was also a very new talk from me, and I learned a lot. And I'm sure that our audience enjoyed it too. So yeah, thank you so much. Just a quick reminder, I have shared a feedback form on the chat, so I would ask everyone to fill it up. Like you can do it later as well. But I have a few questions for you, Lily. So the first question is like, what kind of data is like is used in the prediction, like where the poachers like should put their snares, like what kind of variables or tools like or decision factors affect that?
Yeah, so the factors that impact that decision are the kind of the same factors that we think about when designing like a predictive machine learning algorithm. So anything that we think might be correlated to animal distribution or human behavior. So things that are relevant to animals are like elevation, land cover, temperature, precipitation, vegetation, and all of this changes over time. So you have to make sure that we're getting seasonally relevant information. And for humans, it would be things like accessibility. So how far is an area to the closest road or the closest village? If we had information about like economics, so if we had information about like the price of ivory on the black market, for example, or the price of bushmeat, that would be immensely valuable. It's often very, very hard to get that data. But ideally, that would be wonderful if we could have.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The other question is around reward designing. So it's a question by Mansi that in most cases, we don't have the model of the environment. So you don't know what actions lead to what next state. So how do you really like design your rewards?
So the question of reward design is very tricky because this requires us like to simplify into one number what our ecological goals are. And as I was pointing out before, one of the things that makes conservation more difficult in one way versus climate is that we have really complex interaction effects. So instead of just focusing on like parts per million of CO2 CO2 equivalent particulates, we have to think about like, okay, what is the ecological outcome that we care about? And that is probably some like complex notion of like ecosystem connectivity or species richness that is often really, really hard to quantify, hard to measure. So oftentimes people will use some kind of proxy instead. And that proxy will be something that is easier to measure that we think of as representative. And this a good number for that might be like the population of a certain keystone species. So if we look at like the population of tigers, like how many tigers are there in the land, or how many elephants, or how many rhinos, oftentimes like the keystone species can't survive unless everything else in the ecosystem is healthy and intact. So especially for like key predators, such as tigers, that require like a sufficient healthy population of ungulates to prey on, for example, if we measure like this one species, which both simplifies our monitoring, because then we don't have to measure 20 different types of species, but only one, but then that becomes representative of other downstream measures of ecosystem robustness as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think
as we're going through this, I also forgot that I have this additional slide of further readings and references. So all of these are linked to papers that will go into more depth about all the topics that I listed, that I discussed today. And I'll be sure to share this with the folks at CCAI so you can have direct access to these links as well.
Yeah, there was a follow-up question on that. Like, are there any courses on the web where people can like learn about decision-making algorithms?
So I don't know of. There's certainly many courses on like any specific kind of decision making. So there's a lot of wonderful courses on reinforcement learning, for example. David Silver at London is an expert on reinforcement learning and has a really wonderful like lecture series that is available on YouTube. And all of the materials are there as well. Berkeley, the University of Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, has a lot of like lecture materials on all sorts of topics in computer vision, including online learning, including optimization. So I think if you wanted to like get a broad overview about decision making, it would be hard to find like a specific compendium. But if you want to delve more in depth on any one of these topics, then there are certainly wonderful like videos and tutorials online for those.
Thank you. There's another interesting question. What are the criteria or frameworks that leads to the machine learning model design choices, like for addressing specific biodiversity problems?
Let me try to understand the question. Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, I can repeat like word by word. What criteria or framework do you recommend? for selecting the most suitable machine learning problem to address specific biodiversity problems?
Yeah, okay, so how do you do this matching between like here's the problem that I have and then here is the algorithm that help us solve it? And I don't think there's like a shortcut to answering that question. I think it requires both having a good understanding of like what the capabilities and requirements are like in various different types of algorithms, and then also a good understanding of the domain of like what other factors are at play here. Is it a static or a dynamic setting? Is there uncertainty here? Who are the stakeholders? Is it a multi-agent setting? Is there incentives that you have to design? What is the objective? What types of actions are available to us? How often do we have to take these actions? So it really is an art and not a science of mapping which methods to use for a specific problem setting. But hopefully this gives a little bit more of an overview of what different types of decision-making methods are available. And then you as like the domain expert in whatever problem you're working in can help do this matching a little bit better.
Okay, I'll just take one last question, Lily. Is there any relationship between market design and reinforcement learning?
So oftentimes market design focuses on like a single decision, which is like how I should set up like payments or some kind of like matching or allocation problem. Whereas reinforcement learning thinks about like I have to take a new action at every time step. But there is like a little bit of work coming up nowadays on adaptive design for markets. So this would be like changing like based on how things worked in the last time step, like the last year or so, like changing the exact parameters of the market mechanism of like how many fishing licenses should we give out, or what kind of payment for the users in a PES program should we be given. So there is a little bit of burgeoning work there, but it's there is not much. And if that is an area of research that you're excited about going in towards, I think that could be really fascinating combination.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much again, Lily, and thank you so much again, Devis, for the wonderful lectures. I'm sure I think our attendees of the summer school learned a lot. Yeah, thank you, Devis. Yeah, and I think again we'll roll out the slides to all the attendees. We'll get them from the speakers and roll out to everyone. I hope you had a wonderful time too, like Lily and Devis. I know it's a virtual scenario, so I think the in-person slightly different, but I hope you enjoyed. And I think 300 attendees, I've never seen it like in no platform. So it was a big viewership. Yeah, and I think everyone on the chat is saying thanks as well. So yeah, thank you so much again to both the speakers and to everyone who has attended.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Aditya, for having us.
Problem. Thank you, Devis. Thank you, Lily.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.